Hello everyone, welcome to Off the Cuff, where the headlines come to life. And today my guest is Dr. Ron Stockton. He is a professor of political science at the University of Michigan. He's an author and a co-author as well for numerous books. Dr. Stockton, welcome to Off the Cuff. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You recently did an exhibit and a display, and you have ventured on this journey of studying different graves, different grave sites, and different cemeteries, which we talked about a little earlier, which is completely and very phenomenally exciting stuff, which is not something you really relate to graves and death, but just looking at the information you shared with me, it's very exciting. I want to really talk about that in depth, but given you are a political science instructor and professor, what is your take? And I'm slipping this in, but what is your take as to what is going on right now within our political environment, our leadership, and really moving forward as a country? No, not specifics, but just your take on what's happening.
We've got a lot of poison, a lot of anger, a lot of danger. We have a leadership that seems to build itself up by dividing us. We've never had this. Maybe a little bit during Nixon's time, but never. Our presidents have always tried to reach out to every American. We find leadership now that's not doing that. And that's unique, and it's very disturbing, and it's going to leave a permanent, after this phase of our history is over, there'll be permanent scars that are going to have trouble healing.
It's a very dangerous time, and provoking, I think, issues seems to be the norm within our base at this point, and dividing the country. You are so right. But how is there a way to survive this?
I think what's interesting is a lot of young people are very attentive. They weren't attentive before. I've dealt with young people for,
sort of waking the sleeping giant kind of thing.
Something like that, and I hope our young people are different from any previous generation. It's primarily because what we know about how we shape our values is that if we know anybody who is different from us in some way, we have a good friend who is different from us in some way, then our attitude towards anybody who's different from us in any way changes. We become more open and flexible.
Sure.
So if I, as a Protestant, know somebody who's Jewish or Muslim, have a friend who's Jewish or Muslim, then my attitude towards every other group, towards homosexuals, towards Mormons, towards Hindus, even if I've never met a group of people, I'm sort of assuming that they're good people. Our young people have this advantage, and I tell my students that I teach on the Dearborn campus, I tell my students that the real education is just being in the class. It's studying for the exam with a group of other students. And at that point, the differences disappear. And so young people are experiencing that. It's almost not the fault of older generations, We didn't have that advantage. I never knew a black person at all until I went to college and had a black roommate. I had never before even talk to a black person. So suddenly, or someone who's Jewish, so suddenly these things, and certainly not someone who's a Muslim, and so suddenly once you have a breakthrough and you realize this person is okay, then suddenly everybody else is okay. Your mind opens up. And so I'm not too hard on older generations, my own generation, because we didn't have the advantages. I tell students, don't throw your arm out patting yourself on the back, because you kind of were given a gift by the country. But nevertheless, it's a very positive thing that's happening, but it's happening at the ground level. It's not happening in Washington.
Absolutely. I think the millennials, and you're right, the young people do have a different image and perception of reality, and hoping that overrides what we're seeing right now. But the damage is being done, and that's really what we're focusing on, and hopefully we can come together as a country and heal, I
Yes.
guess is the word. So you have a focus that is really very interesting and very unusual, and I don't think anyone has really ever ventured into this kind of study or focus, or have they?
No.
Okay.
I've got 2 articles coming out in an academic journal, and they have to do with Muslim graves and what we can learn from Muslim graves. I've spent a decade now.
So your focus is just on Muslim graves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I got to tell you, I grew up in graveyards. When I was a little boy,
Okay, explain that.
in my small town, every Memorial Day, which is what Veterans Day was called in those days, we would go Decoration Day. Every Decoration Day, we would go down to our local graveyard and clean up the graves of our family members, and everybody would be there. It seems, and people would take me around and tell me stories about people. And it was fascinating to me. I realized you could learn a lot from a graveyard. So as I got older, I would go to graveyards, and my wife and I would go to graveyards. Anytime we'd be in a city or a country, we would go to graveyards. About 10 years ago, I decided to start. I had 5 Muslim students, and we decided to start looking for all of the places in Southeast Michigan where Muslims are buried. So at this point, I've found 26 different places. I've visited all of them. I've got about 1,000 distinct photos I've taken. And I prepared a photo exhibit, which has been put on in a couple of places, including the Centennial Library.
Here, yes.
And I've got 2 articles coming out now. And these are academic articles, so there are other professors who review them before they're published. And they say that there's nothing like this. No one has ever used gravestones as a way of studying the Muslim community.
And people, yeah, in general. I know in Dearborn Heights, our Nowland cemetery was refurbished and regenerated, and there was an opening not too long ago. So that was sort of the the catalyst in saying, I know Dr. Stockton did
when
this.
Bob, who's running the camera, told me about this,
manager.
My first question was, were there any Muslim graves there? And I don't think so, and he didn't remember any. But I'm always looking for another place where Muslims might be buried that I haven't found.
Well, I think early on, the scattering of Muslims all over the country, and I don't think it was like a certain spot or a certain place, and it was just sort of intertwined with everyone else. But now it may be a little bit different. But talk to us about what you found, and what was the aha moment in saying, this is the difference, or this is what I'm seeing, or this is the pattern that I found in my studies.
I found 2 things that were aha moments. One is that Muslims were buried in 26 different places. That's amazing to me. But this thing that was really more important, and to me as a political scientist it was very important, is that I found people from 31 different countries, or religious groups, or groups I'd never heard of. I had heard of them vaguely, but I had never realized that they were here in Southeast Michigan. And as you know, my colleagues and I wrote a book on Arab Americans, which is not the same as Muslims. But, you find the Arab Muslims, the Lebanese and the Palestinians and the Syrians and whatever, the Iraqis. But then you go beyond that, you find Pakistanis. I wasn't surprised at that. Then I found a Chinese, and then I found a Nigerian, and then I found Azerbaijan, and someone from Baku, and you find someone from Hyderabad, which doesn't surprise me, but right down there they were from Hyderabad. That was an independent state in the middle of India.
Wow.
Until it became independent, until India became independent, and then it became a state. But there were Muslims there. And this person writes he was from Hyderabad and he moved to Pakistan. And there was a migration, sometimes voluntary, sometimes violent. But I was amazed at all the different variety of things that I found. I found the Ahmadiyas. This is a group of people based in India and Pakistan they're oppressed in Pakistan. And I found their grave section. I found the Crimean Turks. I mean, the Crimeans are someone I read about in the newspaper with Putin and the Black Sea Fleet, and finally I met a person, and she said, "Oh, I'm a Crimean Turk," and I said, "Whoa, really? I didn't know you were here." And she said, "Yeah, and we've got our own graveyard section," which made me really happy.
Really?
So, yes.
That's interesting. And people sometimes especially with our current environment, Arab does not equal Muslim. Muslim does
Right.
not equal Arab. I mean,
Right.
Muslims can be
Yeah.
from Switzerland, from Sweden,
Exactly.
from any
Exactly.
part of the
Yeah.
country, and so
Yeah.
that's a misconception
Right.
quite often taken. But tell us what you found. I know that the very first one is
Well, what do
something
you
that,
what do you see here that we can
well,
talk about?
Well, definitely, this is a wonderful rendition of my
That's your
my
father.
dad's
That's your
my
father's.
dad's grave.
Yeah, I didn't realize that when I took it. I just thought this is a really nice marker.
Yes,
And
Ali Muhammad Awada.
yeah, beloved husband, father, and uncle.
Right.
He was in the Masons. Look at
Yes.
that. He's got this old Ottoman crescent and star, and which is not Islamic, but people think it is, and some people do anyway. It says he was born in 1893 and died in 1976.
Yes.
Can you read this? What does it say across
Well,
the top?
that says his name, Ali Muhammad Awada. From Mashghara, which is a village in Lebanon, and this actually says, there's a saying that says, do good deeds as best as you can, as long as you can also come out saliman, which means in good shape. So do what you can, the
Yes.
best way you can,
Yes.
but not in hurting yourself as well.
Right,
So that's
right.
that's something that he actually lived by. He was always very anonymous in what he did. But
There are several standard things, Islamic things, that you will find on Muslim graves. Often something from Al-Fajr about, if you lead a righteous life, God will have a place for you in heaven. And so I've paraphrased that. And or they'll put the Bismillah or
Bismillah.
and those sorts of things on there. These are very standardized things. Or
And that means in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful.
yeah, exactly. Or they'll have the Fatiha, which is the opening of the Quran, in the name of God, the Merciful, the Benevolent, Creator of the universe, etc. Every Muslim can recite that, or some will just simply say Fatiha, because if you're a Muslim, the purpose of going to a grave is to
say
pray,
the Fatiha, right?
and so it'll simply say Fatiha, or it will say pray in English, and so these are very common things. This is sort of the Islamic dimension of these gravestones. But what I found is that very often people's culture is more important than the religious
aspect.
As I often say, that when you go to Muslim graveyards, you realize that Islam is not, these are not Islamic graves, they're the graves of Muslims. And Muslims are individuals, and they're as diverse as anybody else. So they'll often, someone will put gone fishing, and what is that, or some woman put on there, my batteries wore out, and those kinds of personal.
Well, that almost describes them in life as well.
I like
very light, very.
And I often tell when I'm talking to students about this, I'll say, okay, remember that a gravestone is not about death; it's about life.
Right.
It's about who you were and how you want to be remembered and what was important to you. So people will say, happily married. Now, this is very much a 19th century American thing. You go to the small town graveyard where I grew up, and very often people put, married on such and such a date. It will show 2 rings intertwined. That's very American. But what you see is that Muslims, basically, they learn from their neighbors. People will say, that is so nice. Why don't we do that on our stone, Right. And so they'll add those things which they've picked up from other people. And they're cultural things, they're personal things, there's choices that you put down there.
And I like that because that reflects that individual's
Absolutely.
life and how they felt, and
Absolutely.
and it's a lighter sense of passing over and knowing that there's something else out there. This was very interesting. We spoke about this earlier, and this is all done in Arabic.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see that, but
it's Roseland Park,
right?
And which was one of the earliest places where Muslims were buried. Okay, this is interesting because it flies in the face of stereotypes. We Americans think that when people come to this country, there are people who just say, "I'm so happy to be here," and they plunge in and they become totally American. They learn English, they pick up a nickname, whatever it may be, And so, and they join a club. Other people kind of stay in the village, except the village. My great-grandfather was from France. He never learned English. he lived his whole life in a French village that just happened to be in Illinois. And that's the opposite image. Now, this person is very interesting because if you look at his stone, it's in Roseland Park. If you look at his stone, it doesn't have a single word of English on it. There's nothing here that indicates anything. And yet, at the very center of this, he's got a photo of himself in his uniform. He was a veteran of World War I. That's what he wants to be remembered as. Up across the top, you see 3 chain links, which indicates he was a member of the Odd Fellows, which is a service organization. And so this is basically, he's totally Arab, he's totally American. That distinction, as Arab Americans often say, we exist on both sides of the hyphen, you know, we're Americans and we're Arabs. This guy is a Muslim, Arab, American.
Patriot.
Yeah, he was a patriot. To him, being a patriot and serving his country, that was how he wanted to be remembered.
Absolutely. And again, that's reflective of his life
his
on
identity.
Earth and his identity.
Who am I? This is what I want you to remember.
We have another one here, and this is, explain that to us a little bit.
This
we'll have
is
that
so
up on
this is so interesting. These are 2 Nigerians. They're Yorubas from southwest Nigeria on the coast. Nigeria is divided north and south. The north is very Muslim. The south tends to be not very Muslim. But in southwest, among the Yorubas, there's a mixture. There's some people who are Muslims, some who are Christians. And here is Chief Jibril, that would be Gabriel, and Haja Abeke, who is, her name is Abeke, and she's made the Hajj. Their photographs are here. In memory of our beloved husband, father, and grandfather, in memory of our beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She's got her traditional head cover. He was born in Lagos, which was then the capital of Nigeria. They've moved the capital, but that's the big port city. She's born in Ibadan in western Nigeria, which is the center of Yoruba culture. So when you think of Muslims, you don't think of Nigerians. I mean, you may think of them in Nigeria, you don't think of them in Detroit. And I think I've seen something that people from other places come here to be buried. Now,
you think so?
Yeah.
Why do you come to that assumption?
Well, there's a pattern. The first Christian church that we can tell, Arab Christian church, was built in 1885 in Worcester, Massachusetts. And very soon, those Christians, they were Lebanese Christians, they got a section of the cemetery for their burials. Once they did that, people from other places, where they were the only Lebanese person in miles around, would have their bodies sent not back to Lebanon, which you couldn't do because that was not possible 100 years ago.
At that point, right.
Yeah, so they would have their bodies moved to Worcester, Massachusetts. It became like a surrogate homeland. So think about this. If you live in Ontario in a little village, there's one person who says, born in Canada, died in Canada. So why is he buried here? Because I think he wanted to be buried within a community. And so his body was returned, not to his homeland, wherever that would have been, but he's Kurdish. I don't know exactly. He could have been Iraqi. He could have been Turkish. We don't know. But he returned to his homeland here. So when I see someone who is a Nigerian, I think, what are they doing here? And I see someone who's a Chinese, and there's not a Chinese Muslim community around here. It's not as if there are 1,000 of them and they've got a center. There's nothing like that. So obviously these are single people who came from somewhere else. I see someone from Azerbaijan, from Baku, and I think, what are they doing here? And this is where they want to be buried, among a community.
Absolutely. I remember growing up, with going to church or going to the mosque. I remember we used to have all kinds of individuals come into the mosque because it's not, and again that sense of Arab Muslim. You know, we had African Americans come in. We had, you know, different ethnicities that came in, especially if, you know, they were visiting and wanted to go to the mosque, they would come. So growing up, that was the vision we had. It was very eclectic and very inclusive, and that I think is really the basis of, you know, when you look at all these different individuals and how they identify. And, you know, Islam is not something that is exclusive, as we're saying. So it's wonderful to see all of these different things and how you discovered, you know, the different places and the 26 different places as well. You have Kimberly Lynn Underwood as well. I mean,
Kimberly Lynn Underwood, that sounds to me like somebody who's very American, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And yet she's got Islamic passages here on her stone, and it says she's dedicated mother of 4, and she's got a little joke. She exceeded her sell-by date. People put these little personal things on. You know, sell-by date, that's when you're supposed to eat this food before, you know, before January, right? That's after that, you can't sell it. And so she's exceeded her sell-by date. And that's kind of a joke that she made. Probably she joked with her kids, and they said, okay, Mom made that joke all the time.
But you know how wonderful that would be when you go and visit that and then read that.
You would laugh, wouldn't you?
Yeah, just smile and remember
you would
in a
come
positive
back and you
way.
would remember your mom making this joke or the kind of person she was. Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this one was very interesting as well. Tell us about what we're looking at.
So this is Altheria M. Shakir, and she
Shakir. Yes.
Shakir, yeah, and she's this is in a Muslim site. She is a Muslim. Across the top, she has a very African American. She's African American. This has a very African American. She says arrived and departed rather than born and died. They'll put arrived and departed. And sometimes they'll say sunrise, sunset, which is kind of nice. And it says a believing servant of God. Okay. Peace be unto you. Okay, those are not strange. And then she's got this star in the middle, a 5-pointed star, and I don't know what this means. I've asked an expert on African American culture who's advising me on this, and he says you can't really tell.
Really?
But she's. It says she could be Eastern Star, which is the Women's Masons group. That could be her. But probably not. And so we don't know for sure. Her name Altheria is very interesting because it's the Arabic word for the Pleiades. The Pleiades are the 7 sisters, one of the most beautiful constellations. And
astrology. Okay, I've looked at
no, astronomy, please. Not astrology.
Astronomy.
It could be astrology.
Astronomy.
Yeah, it could be. But it's a common name because there's a hadith. A local imam explained this to me. I didn't understand it. There's a hadith. The Prophet was sitting around talking and with his companions, and one of the people was a Persian. And the Persians in those days were the great scholars. And in those days, they believed stars were stacked on top of each other. And the Pleiades were the very highest stars. And he said, if faith goes all the way up to the Pleiades, someone from this man's country will figure it out, what it means. And so that became a popular term, Altheria. And so it's a woman's name. Whether she took that on purpose, whether she converted and took a Muslim name with a nice meaning, I don't know. But very often you get more questions than answers when you look at these things. But they've raised the right questions, you know. How do people adapt their culture, and how do they
intertwine the cultures
intertwine
too,
exactly,
as well.
Yes.
You know, Dr. Stockton, I can't believe how fast this segment went. I'm thinking we're only 10 minutes in, and we're pretty much done. We only got a couple minutes. But what was your overall reaction? What was your overall takeaway from this wonderful initiative that you've sort of undertaken, and it's been 10 years in the making? So, how can you just sum up what?
Here's what I would say: that when you go into a graveyard, the word Muslim ceases to have a single meaning.
Absolutely.
It's got so many different meanings to so many different people. It's not just about Islam, the religion. All Muslims agree on the pillars of the faith. Everybody agrees on the 5 key principles. But beyond that, people are individuals, and they put on their stones what they want as individuals, be it their nationality, be it their religious subgrouping,
or their lifestyle.
Or their lifestyle, or the fact that they were happily married, or they served their country, or they like fishing. You know, it's whatever it is, you know. And so I think you just see astonishing complexity in a very good way. I mean, it's made me really appreciate the Muslim community in a greater way than I had before I started this project 10 years ago.
You know, I look at it, and I look at us here on Earth, and how diverse we are, and, you know, how everyone has their own specific sense of who they want to be and what they want to be represented as. And I also look at the different graves and the grave sites and death, and how we all end up basically in the same place. Maybe putting importance on certain things during life, but we're all there, and we're all in the same place. And I think that if that's not a uniter, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your research and, you know, bringing this to light. This is a very interesting kind of study, the only one of its kind. And I know that you've got a lot of books out as well. So if anyone's interested in additional information about this, it's Dr. Ron Stockton from the University of Michigan, and he does have many books out there. Thank you so much for being with us. And I hope you'll come back. Because I think we need to talk about all kinds of other stuff too.
There's other things to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for being with us, and thank you all for being with us. See you soon.